project, the Health, Finance, and Governance, or HFG project. And this year, we completed the assessment of digital financial services that we're excited to share with you in more detail over the next hour. Today, we'll highlight findings from the assessment on DFS. As you'll hear, we'll plan to emphasize where and how digital financial services, or DFS, intersect with health. We'll also discuss implications for those findings for USAID and other stakeholders, and we'll reflect on what lies ahead, in particular as we prepare to hold broader stakeholder discussions later this year. Next, I would like to invite my colleagues from USAID, Amy Kay and Carol Wilson, to share some opening remarks on behalf of the agency. Amy, over to you.
Thanks so much for that great introduction. I wanted to check in and see if Carol Wilson has joined. Okay, so we'll wait a little bit for Carol, but in the meantime, I wanted just to welcome you all, and we're certainly excited by the high attendance and clear interest in this topic and these topics. And we just wanted to note that findings presented today do focus on the link between access to financial services and more equitable access to social services, including health. And this is a topic that has not been examined thoroughly in the MENA region, so we're excited to share these findings. And as you'll hear, digital financial services present options for us to advance USAID's digital strategy, as well as its commitment to support countries' journey to self-reliance. And it complements a guide by USAID on the role of digital financial security to accelerate USAID's health goals. And USAID is investing in a global landscape study of DFS also with APT Associates. And so this webinar sets the stage for a participatory December event, which we're really excited about, and we'll be sending you all more information regarding this broad cross-sector of stakeholders who will participate, and also we'll ask for some of your inputs if you're interested in participating and shaping the event. So at this point, I wanted to check in and see if Carol was able to join us as well. Okay, so I think that she may be having some access issues with her browser. She said, "I tried to speak, but you couldn't hear me." So this is the world we're living in right now. So we'll invite Carol to provide comments, perhaps as we have our discussion after the presentation. But understand that we have about an hour to be together right now, so we can move forward with the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy. So as a reminder, I want to invite participants, looks like we have about 42 now, to please submit questions as well as comments as you listen to the presentation and throughout the webinar. You should use the Q&A panel that appears on the right of your screen. We'll respond to as many of the questions as we can, and if there are some that we're not able to get to, we'll capture those in a brief summary that we'll send after the webinars. So before we begin the presentations, I'd like to pose a couple of questions. We're interested to gauge the group's familiarity with the concepts of digital financial services and financial protection. To participate in the poll, please follow the instructions to access the Mentimeter service. To begin, find the chat icon at the bottom of your screen that you just see displayed here and click on that icon. A chat box will open on the right of your screen. Click on the link inside the chat box to access the Mentimeter poll. Once you enter the poll, you'll find 3 short questions. It should take just a moment to complete the poll, and please remember that your responses are anonymous. So I'll pause for about 20 to 30 seconds now, just to allow people a moment to access Mentimeter and to complete the poll. Take about another 10 seconds. Do we, just want to double check that we have the Mentimeter link in the chat box. Should be visible.
We give everyone 10 more seconds. We just got it in the chat box.
Got it. Okay. So again, when you click on that link, it will take you into the Mentimeter poll. You'll find 3 short questions, and we'll begin to tabulate the responses as they come in. So take a few moments. When you finish the poll, please exit and return to the webinar. You can do this by clicking on the WebEx browser tab, or if you've downloaded the WebEx app, you can click on the blue and green WebEx icon that is shown here on the slide. So we'll continue to keep the poll open, so if you need a bit more time to finish, please go ahead and do so. But in the meantime, we can go ahead and see how the results are shaping up. So first, I can see by the count icon that's in the lower right-hand corner of the screen that 30 people so far have completed the poll. And based on the results here, we can see that on average, the group is sitting somewhere in the middle in terms of feeling familiar with concepts of financial inclusion and financial protection. That's what you see in the blue bar on the top. And we can see that the group is a little more bullish at this point on the second question, which is that digital financial services hold promise to advance health goals in the MENA region. So on average, people are weighing in at about a 5.7 on a scale of 1 to 7. Let's also look at our developing word cloud. So this is our third poll question. So this is interesting and very much real time. We can see that people are associating words like access, inclusion, mobile money, efficiency with this umbrella term of digital financial services. The larger the word, the more hits it's getting. So that means it's, more people are choosing it. And I think many of these terms are, such as mobile money, financial inclusion, cell phones, we'll hear a lot more about today and understand better how they relate to digital financial inclusion. I think regardless of where you stand and where you weighed in terms of your polling, I'm confident that today's discussion will give us all ample food for thought on digital financial services and how they can enable private sector engagement for health. So thanks so much for participating in the poll. Now I'd like to turn to our 2 presenters. Our first presenter is Pamela Riley. Pam has been the digital health advisor for Shops Plus and Apt Associates, and she's the lead author of this assessment. Then we'll hear from Sarah Romarini, digital solutions market lead for Shops Plus and a co-author. Sarah will provide an overview of the findings. Between them, Pam and Sarah have a wealth of insights on digital services, so I'm excited to hear from them. Pam, I'd like to invite you to begin to set the stage. Welcome. Over to you, Pam.
Thank you, Gina. Sarah and I really appreciate this opportunity to present to you all on the topic of digital financial services in the MENA region. As the poll really highlighted, we know this audience is diverse and, in fact, very bifurcated, including a number of you who said you have very limited knowledge of the topic and others who are expert. So to set the stage, I'm going to start with some brief introductory content about what DFS is, how it connects to a public health agenda, and how it can serve as an engine to advance USAID strategies on private sector engagement, digital inclusion, and universal health coverage. Next. The basis for our presentation today is a landscape analysis that Shops Plus conducted on the status, gaps, and opportunities of DFS in the region. We found that the MENA region has among the lowest financial account ownership rates in the world. Our examination focused on 11 diverse countries including both stable governments in North Africa and the Levant, as well as a number of fragile states which have endured prolonged conflicts, humanitarian crises, including Yemen and Syria. Our interest was particularly focused on the health sector, which as a sector has lagged behind other sectors in incorporating digital payments to improve services. Our methodology was primarily a lit review with about a dozen key informant interviews. And our aim for the report and this webinar are to synthesize some of the key trends and initiatives and to provide a baseline for framing further discussion on why and how USAID can best integrate DFS in its programmatic activities in the region. Next slide. To start with the global context, digital financial services are a means for achieving financial inclusion, which is the concept of connecting underserved populations to the formal financial system. Globally, 1.7 billion people in the world lack access to basic financial services. And the point of financial inclusion is to improve the underlying economic conditions in which people live. And as economic conditions improve, so does health. For more than a decade, there's been significant efforts in the development sector by USAID and others to promote the concept of financial inclusion through alliances such as the Better Than Cash Alliance, CGAP, and Alliance for Financial Inclusion. These institutions work with country partners to develop expertise on how to best move the dial through peer exchange, research, innovative partnerships, and advocacy. So financial inclusion is a force for good. It's a goal, and digital financial services are a means of achieving that goal. Next slide. So what are we talking about when we use the term DFS? We are referring to any financial services accessed or delivered through any digital channels. And this includes mobile phone accounts, debit cards used at an ATM, internet services like PayPal, and biometric devices like fingerprint readers tied to sales terminals. The terminology for DFS can be confusing. You may hear references to e-wallets, m-banking, electronic payments, Bitcoin, mobile money, NFC technology. What is important is that all of those are DFS applications. Any form in which funds can be made virtual as opposed to physical cash notes is a form of digital financial services. And the concept underpinning all categories is that there's an account tied to a specific individual accessed through digital means. Next. So why is there so much interest in DFS and their potential to address the needs of the poor? The answer is that digital technology changes the calculus in how financial services are marketed, operationalized, and scaled. DFS ties the reach of mobile networks and the internet to the banking infrastructure, which previously was limited to brick and mortar branches, and in many cases did not reach remote villages or low-income populations. So by bringing financial services into the home through mobile phones, DFS lowers the cost of delivering services and increases efficiency for making bulk payments or individual transfers. Virtual funds are more secure and can empower account holders with greater control over their money. And finally, due to its real-time tracking, DFS automates record keeping for traceability, which provides important protections against corruption, fraud, and leakage in programmatic activities. Next. So what do those DFS benefits have to do with our public health agenda? Conceptually, we view DFS as a link between three overlapping concepts: digital health, which facilitates the real-time delivery and tracking of care and increases utilization and quality of services. Financial inclusion, which expands access to personal financial accounts and economic opportunities. And universal health coverage, which lowers barriers to affordable health services through pooling and prepayment. DFS is also an engine for promoting USAID's policy on private sector engagement. The digital economy is a commercial economy. The network, the applications, the devices create economic activity, and this introduces new market players, creates new jobs, and provides potential for new public-private partnerships. Next. In our report, we looked at how these links between DFS and health are playing out in the region. And to examine that, we organized our analysis around the 4 core components of a DFS ecosystem. Those components are first the enabling policies, the regulatory frameworks that establish who, how, and where services will be available. The second component is the e-payment backbone. This is the central database or clearinghouse, also called a national switch, where money can be stored, exchanged, and tracked. This infrastructure is needed to allow competing services to reliably conduct transactions between them. The third component is the supply of services and the service providers who must be licensed and monitored to design and market the right products at the right price. And finally, the success of DFS requires demand from customers who use and understand the services. Until these basics are in place, the more advanced applications that we want to see in the health sector are unlikely to gain traction and thrive. So this would include interest-bearing savings, on-demand credit and credit histories, simple insurance services, or new investment products. Next. And finally, I want to note that the research and writing for our MENA landscape was completed before the pandemic, but the COVID-19 crisis has changed the world. The macroeconomic impacts, the strains on health systems, and the dramatic effects of the shutdowns have shifted priorities and created many new demands. What is clear is that this global health crisis is providing an impetus to accelerate the use of DFS. Globally, use of digital banking has dramatically increased. Cash transactions are down because there's a need to replace human-to-human transactions. And families and businesses need a way to receive urgent aid quickly and efficiently. But at the same time, there are many new burdens and fiscal constraints placed on governments, and this has the potential to derail basic services and slow planned economic investments. In short, this crisis is both an opportunity to fast-track the push toward DFS use, as well as posing a threat that those at greatest risk are left behind. I am going to turn the presentation over now to Sarah for some more detailed findings from our report and next steps. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Pam. Let's dive into the report's regional findings. Next slide. Thanks. Here we can see just how starkly the 11 focus countries compare in terms of account ownership and that high percentage of being unbanked compared to other countries in the MENA region like Oman, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and regions like sub-Saharan Africa. This large percentage of unbanked people really reflects an opportunity for DFS to enable easier access to an account. Next. There were 4 key barriers to account ownership. And while these barriers are applicable in other regions, they're especially pronounced in these 11 MENA-focused countries. Barrier 1, geopolitics. Some of the focus countries are facing active conflict and humanitarian, political, economic crises. And on top of that, their infrastructure is really in shambles.
Hello, Sarah. This is Gina. We're not hearing you right now. Jean, is there any diagnosis here to see if we otherwise?
I'm going to switch my audio. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, yes, we can.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry for that.
Yes. Okay.
Sure. I'm going to start again with the key barriers. Were you able to hear that?
Yes, yes. I think you can just recap and proceed from here.
Okay, sure. Well, number one, I'm not sure where I left off, but number one, the geopolitics, as you all can imagine, this region is fraught with geopolitical crises and humanitarian economic crises. Barrier two, that conservative banking culture. DFS is led by a country's central bank, and the MENA region is at greater risk for financing terrorism and money laundering. So central banks are reticent to innovate because of those risks. And third, the trust in government and financial institutions is low. And for DFS to thrive, people need to trust those systems that protects their funds and also their personal information. And lastly, that gender gap in account ownership is a real barrier. Globally, women are 7% less likely than men to have a financial account, and in this region, it's 17% on average. The digital gender gap in the region also creates challenges, not only for account ownership, but also for DFS. Next. While those stats might feel daunting, there's been significant interest in activity that is opening the door to DFS in the region. Yemen, for example, launched its first mobile money service this year. Egypt is the first to mandate going cashless for government services. Iraq is using biometric debit cards. Some of these innovations aren't even in practice in the US. So despite the barriers, the region's DFS progress shouldn't be underestimated, and there are more opportunities to develop it, especially for health. Next. To make that change possible, our report identified the 3 biggest catalyzers of DFS growth in the MENA region, and I'll share more about each of them. Next. Establishing a regulatory environment is a critical first step to creating an active DFS ecosystem. One key reform is DFS authorization. A number of countries are moving to allow non-banks to provide financial services. So that opens up the playing field in competition. A second regulatory change is around knowing your customer, KYC, and reducing the requirements for opening accounts, letting folks open accounts remotely, for example, while not compromising security. And lastly, DFS thrives on innovation. Enabling regulation needs that dynamic test environment, so innovation hubs, venture capital, and regulatory waivers for fintech providers. All of these help the regulators and innovators to collaborate. Our study reviewed the regulatory environment for all 11 countries and presents how they compare to each other. Egypt, Jordan, and Morocco are the most advanced in terms of creating that enabling environment. Next. Enabler 2, how widespread is mobile access? Mobile internet in the region grew by 30% in 4 years. 90% of the population in the MENA region lives within range of a mobile signal. So access to phone and service, of course, is critical for DFS to thrive. Next. The third catalyzer is support, global support in the region. A number of donors are looking to increase financial inclusion, especially for refugees and for women. And here you'll see just 3 large regional initiatives that created that positive change for DFS. So through advocacy and regional networking and lesson sharing, trainings and workshops, This kind of global support really moved the regulatory dial in different MENA regions, especially in Egypt, to achieve that more enabling environment and contributed towards financial inclusion. Next. A study impetus was to examine the role of DFS in health in MENA as a potential catalyst to advance the goals of UHC. And DFS, as we saw even in the beginning in our word cloud, it's a powerful way to get health insurance into the hands of those who need it the most. Due to the nascent state of DFS in the region, there's been limited uptake in the health sector. One of the reasons why is the region's health sector has made limited progress in digitizing processes. And there's a lot of potential in MENA to apply DFS for health. And there's encouraging efforts underway demonstrating countries are beginning to digitize at the facility level. For example, efforts are underway in Egypt to promote digitization in the insurance sector. There's also, as Pam mentioned, increasing demand for telemedicine, especially in the wake of COVID-19. There's a lot of opportunities for DFS in this space that advance the goals of UHC. And that leads us to our case study. Next. Our case study, Democrance, in the report, we spotlighted this because it provides a promising example of change in action. Democrance is a company that enables access to health insurance for populations who may have been previously excluded. It serves as a tech enabler, and it links traditional insurance partners with payment platforms and distribution partners. It's successful because it doesn't really disrupt traditional insurance or mobile phone companies' models. On the consumer side, customers with mobile phone accounts, they receive complimentary basic life insurance, and they can purchase additional simple medical insurance for family members, and then that exposes them to the benefits of insurance. This is a developing model, and it shows the power of partnerships, an enabling regulatory environment, and how also the private sector is responding. Next. Our study explored 3 ways DFS is being applied in the MENA region. Innovation in DFS is coming mainly from the humanitarian sector, so mainly the United Nations and NGOs for refugees, remittances, and for microfinance. First, refugees are a huge underserved population in the region. 1/3 of Jordan's populations are refugees. Mobile use is really high among refugees, and there are a lot of projects that are targeting refugees and some that are using DFS. However, the use of DFS among refugees remains low. We're recommending that efforts are co-designed more closely with refugees to help overcome some of these barriers to adoption. Secondly, remittances are a powerful way to increase DFS in the MENA region. They're a big part of the GDP. For example, in Lebanon, it's about 15% of the country's GDP. In West Bank and Gaza, it's 16%. However, currently, it relies heavily on physical cash agents or cash houses that charge a fortune to transfer funds. It hasn't transitioned to DFS because of the complex banking agreements needed between countries. It's potentially big business and an important opportunity for partners to promote DFS models. And lastly, microfinance. These are frontline providers of financial services for the poor, and they can expose new populations to DFS. Typically, so these are frontline access for underserved populations, and typically, while they can't get loans, they can potentially get microfinance loans. They can serve as this powerful partner here. MFIs, though, microfinance institutions, are underfunded and slow to digitize. And this also presents a partnership or promotion opportunity, which can also promote financial inclusion. Next. We organized recommendations in the report in 2 categories, those to advance financial inclusion in the region and those focused on the health sector. We added a 3rd set of recommendations after relevant to the pandemic to help position COVID-19 as a catalyst for greater use of DFS. Our recommendations focus on regional solutions that are relevant to the MER Bureau and suggesting international best practices and ways to advance research. Next. The first is for USAID to explore increasing investments for collaboration for financial inclusion. Each of these recommendations, whether it's for regulatory assistance, consumer education, DFS provider support, gender equity, each of these envisions close collaboration with global stakeholders in the region, like those that Pam mentioned, like AFI, to build on existing government partnerships. Next. Secondly, USAID could more directly leverage DFS as an accelerator in its health sector programming. And to gain traction, we recommend ways to increase awareness within the health sector of DFS, engaging health partners and facilitating exchanges for health insurance stakeholders to learn from international best practices and investing in additional research. Again, each of these envisions collaboration with global and regional stakeholders in the MENA region. Next. Next slide, please. As you might imagine, we cover a lot of ground in this report, and this covers some of the background DFS context that Pam shared about, to comparing each country's regulatory environment to their regional findings, individual country information, and those recommendations. It also includes 11 country snapshots that capture advances towards an enabling DFS environment in each of those countries. They also show the region's diversity as well as some of their shared challenges. I hope you'll take a look at it. It's online, and we'll share the link to that. Next slide. This was an especially interesting report because there were so many relevant opportunities for DFS for the region and where impact can be had. And we especially want to thank Amy and Chuck and Monica for their support and guidance on preparing this report. Over to you, Gina. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Pam. You've both done a terrific job laying out both opportunities as well as challenges for DFS in MENA and how they relate to the private health sector. So thanks for that. Now I would like to ask our discussants to join me in our virtual podium. So we have Amy Kay and an additional guest from USAID, Amani Mbale, who is Senior Digital Health Systems Advisor, joining us today. So great to have everybody here. I also want to remind participants to continue to submit questions. I can see that we've received a couple. I think we'll have time to take some more, so please don't be shy. You can submit them into the Q&A panel. And while you're doing that, I have a couple of questions that I'll use just to kick off this discussion. So the first is quite a broad question, and I'll start with Pam and then Sarah, but then invite Amy and Amani to also weigh in. So having collaborated and seen the results of this assessment on DFS and its focus on health in MENA, what findings surprised you the most and why? Pam?
Thanks, Gina. Yeah, I think for me, the biggest surprise was in how different the 11 countries were, and yet how many of the findings were shared among all 11. And one of those was the level of political commitment at the highest levels in all 11 countries toward financial inclusion. That's a really key first step. And yet, when we would talk to our sources about what some of the barriers were, one of the things that came up in all 11 countries was insufficient representation of the private sector in those negotiations for the enabling environment and how to make the markets work. So I think there's a lot of similarities among countries trying to get DFS off the ground.
Thanks, Pam. Sarah, your thoughts?
Thanks, Gina. Given the regional dynamics, I expected to see a much more robust DFS environment for remittances, and especially in interventions that are targeted at refugees. And because I mentioned the smartphone use is high, and there's a huge need to transfer cash and to transfer it safely across borders. So COVID-19 might be a true catalyzer in that way because it's restricting movement. And that said, too, I'm hopeful because a lot of times countries can go from having like a no DFS environment to an advanced DFS environment relatively quickly, just when the opportunity and when the regulatory conditions permit. So I'm hopeful there for change. Thanks.
Thank you. Amy and Imani, let's hear from you. What surprised you the most about the results as you read our report? Amy, would you like to go first?
Okay, sure. Yeah, no, I thank you very much. And I thanks also just for the comments so far. I think it's really interesting. And I just want to note that originally, when we were conceiving of this report, we were thinking about mobile technologies, mobile populations, considering that the MENA region has the highest number and consistently so of people on the move, and then how they could potentially use the technology they already have at their fingertips to access services, including health. And we were also, thinking that is there a way, considering the remittances, and as you noted, this analysis was done before COVID-19, so remittances have dropped, as we have all discussed internally, about 20%. But is there a way to connect to the remittances, which are enormous in terms of just value? And so I appreciate the comment regarding, connecting the dots and that it hasn't happened quite yet. I would say that I was surprised about the gender component and the gender disparity, surprised but not surprised. Globally, the report cited that there was a 7 percentage point gap in financial inclusion between men and women, but in MENA, as you all noted, it's 17 percentage points. I think what's interesting is the country level analysis, because Jordan ranked, at the top at 29 percentage points, and then Lebanon and Morocco following suit at 24. And yet Jordan and Morocco, as well as Egypt, were cited as creating an enabling environment. So we have to ask, what does this mean for women? And I think we have to ask that often in the region. I think the country level disparity may also speak to the population access. So obviously just generally in conflict impacted and poor countries, that access may be low generally. And I also thought just some of the country level information, including some of the policy engagement. Egypt's 2030 vision is encouraging. Excuse the jets flying over. Sorry about that. Yes, I'm near Norfolk Naval Air Base.
You can hear them.
Yeah, sorry. But I thought that was an exciting policy advancement, and I'd like to just hear more thoughts on that connected to the Central Bank of Egypt. And I understand that there was a roadmap developed, and I thought that was really encouraging because it was in partnership with the National Council for Women, which I worked for 20 years ago. So it's interesting to see, how that may move forward in Egypt as well. I'll stop there and hand it over to Imani, who is really a great expert from the Global Health Bureau in terms of DFS. So.
Well, thanks so much, Amy. And I just wanted to give you guys, the presenters, Pamela and Sarah, really a hand. I'm clapping my hands for you virtually because I thought the presentation was really excellent. And so, yeah, although I have a background in financial services, I don't have a background in MENA. So I was actually very surprised by many of the findings. And I'll try not to reiterate some of the things you all have already said. But I think for me, what actually stood out was the degree with which women are excluded. It's really quite high. In fact, I want to venture to say it's among the highest I've ever seen, given that most of the world is about a 7 to 9% gap. One of the other things that I think is, I was in discussions with Amy very early on in this endeavor. I was expecting to see a bit more activity on, at least in the initial remittances even within a country. So I was surprised to see that the dearth of, if you will, of digital financial services, given that this population that we're looking at is so technologically connected. So I was surprised to see that. But when we are reviewing the enabling environment, the policies and the laws, and perhaps the government's central bank's reticence, especially around anti-money laundering or the financing of terrorism, it absolutely makes sense for that region. So So a few surprises, but again, surprise but not surprise. And I'll stop there.
Great, thanks. Let me, excuse me, pose a second question to you all. Also quite general, but in the sphere of private sector engagement and deploying private sector engagement in programming in support of the country's journeys to self-reliance. I'd like to ask our discussants, and maybe we can start with Amy and Amani this time. What opportunities do you see to promote private sector engagement through DFS?
I can start this time.
Yes, please.
And so I think the opportunities that you've highlighted in this presentation in the report, where you're beginning to see an opening and this openness towards financial services, digital financial services. I take note that Egypt, in their regulatory environment, is really encouraging the digitization of government payments. And so that is, I think, a great opportunity to start. Obviously, the government will and probably does do a great number of payments, but finding even one of those payment streams to begin to digitize that, working with private sector actors who will be your banks or your financial technology firms in order to implement those, I think is an excellent place to start. Social services and social payments will be the place, and oftentimes you'll be able to reach communities that are excluded not only financially but in other ways. So I would say that that's a great opportunity for private sector engagement.
Thanks.
Thanks, Amani. That's great. I mean, I would just add to what you're saying in terms of just the broader objective under the digital strategy to support communications infrastructure and digital markets. And we understand, that there are risks and opportunities in that regard, including cybersecurity and supply chain risks, and especially as they increase in scale. And we've seen this with COVID-19, but I think the region is especially interesting in that regard. And I think, the urgency is there as the internet connectivity shifts from 3G to 4G to 5G. And I know our director, Carol Wilson, has been looking at this quite intensely in terms of cybersecurity and authoritarian regimes and things like that. Obviously, the innovation piece is important in terms of investment for the private sector. And I do think that the Middle East and North Africa is particularly savvy and innovative, especially when it comes to being tech savvy. And sometimes that's even in direct response to authoritarian regimes, but in other regards as well. I'll give one example in that we did have, for example, a private sector physicians diaspora group approach us to support telemedicine in Libya, because while they had the infrastructure, they had the hospitals, they had the clinics, they were empty. And some people just needed a point of first diagnosis. And I think we're all considering that now with COVID-19 in terms of how can we use telemedicine to at least get that first set of information to then refer and know where to go to next. Also, I just appreciated the recognition that, there are points of inclusion and exclusion. And so sometimes the business case can't be justified quite yet because the risk is too burdensome. And so, that may require public investment to start and then to aggregate demand and think about lowering the cost of market entry and extending connectivity to previously unreachable areas. And so USAID, I think, is positioned for that bridging. And certainly, through our partnerships and expertise. So I'll stop there and hand it over to our presenters.
Yeah. Just to interject, I can see that we have a couple of questions coming in, and we have about 10 minutes remaining. So let me just ask Pam or Sarah, any brief remarks that you'd like to add on to this discussion about potential for DFS and private sector engagement, and then we'll go to some participant questions.
I think the one thing I would kind of build on what Amani and Amy were saying in terms of overcoming the barriers for women to access, for refugees to use. when we look at the research of what the barriers are, a lot of them say, yeah, there's just no point, there's no place for me to use this digital service. There aren't enough cash out points. There aren't enough agents in the regions where I need them. So I think it's an opportunity for USAID to partner with those providers, particularly on the agent kind of expansion side, as a way to, promote the goals of financial inclusion as well as, bringing in underserved populations.
Sure. Just one last quick note. Pam, I couldn't agree more, and I think Amani and Amy, you both covered it very well. Just one more thing. I do think that's why our case study was so interesting, because it brought together the mobile phone operators who are incredibly powerful in this, and also the insurance companies. We see some powerful partnerships that are happening there. And again, it's just an opportunity to increase financial inclusion and make sure that we get insurance also into the hands of those who need it the most. Thanks.
Thank you. Got a couple of questions that have come in from participants. So the first two are really about financial services. I'll read them both and then turn them over. Number one, the Hawala system, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Hawala system is huge in MENA. How did the study factor in informal financial markets that are much more accessible to people than traditional banking? So I think really any thoughts around informal financial services. And then second question in this sphere is that coming from Sweta, thanks Sweta, have there been experiences such as pilots or examples where programs have scaled up with flexible spending accounts in the region? Do we know anything about that? So what do we think about informal financial services and anything about flexible spending accounts?
I'm going to take the one on the informal financial services, because I think it gets to the heart of why is DFS use so low in the MENA region. And the answer is, based on all the research studies that we accessed, that people's needs are being met. When they want to provide money to family back in Syria, they go to the Hawalas, and those folks are the agents for distributing cash for those that need to transfer it. And when we look at the success of a service like M-Pesa in Kenya, it served a need. It lowered the cost of people sending money to people in rural areas from, family members in the city. And that was really the catalyst that made mobile money so successful. And what we keep hearing from the beneficiaries that are asked, why aren't you using these digital services? Their answer is, they're too expensive. I don't understand how they work, and I don't trust that they will keep my money safe. I trust the Hawala. So those are the barriers that, I think we're all working to overcome.
And Pam, building off of that real quick, I think that just also one of the things that came out so strongly was the issue of trust. And I think that the Hawalas really just reinforced that, like this is a trusted route, and it'll be interesting to see how COVID changes that. Thanks.
Amani, Amy, anything you would add?
Yeah, I'll just add.
Trust, or go ahead, please.
Yes, I'll just add this on behavior change in digital financial services. So, like in any behavior, we tend to continue to do what we're comfortable with, unless there's some reason or some exogenous factor that forces us to change our behavior. That's one way, or we change it organically through our social networks, and people we trust are changing, and then we copy. So in Kenya, we refer often to M-Pesa, but M-Pesa started off slow, and it had a couple of failed attempts as well. But in 2007, there was an election in Kenya, which resulted in violence, and people were prohibited from leaving their home areas. whether those areas were in the rural areas or in the urban areas. And so although they were accustomed to sending money, cash, through the transportation system, through the buses that would go up and down the countryside, that was no longer possible. They were forced to use mobile money as a way to be able to send money back home. And so the agent network, that Pam referred to, and the mobile network companies that had put out M-Pesa had to quickly make sure that those systems were working so people could trust them, could understand how to send them, and did begin to trust and did begin to use them. And so to Sarah's point, it will be very interesting to see the impact and how behavior changes because of COVID, right? It doesn't mean that the wallet system will fail, obviously not, but it will necessitate some people to change behavior. So it will be interesting to look out for that and see what changes come about.
Does anybody know anything about flexible spending accounts? Any experience in the region?
I do not know of any examples on flexible spending accounts based on the research we did. There may be some examples. I think it's fair to say that the DFS providers in many of the countries do start out working with the kind of wealthier populations and help people that have bank accounts do more online banking, et cetera. So I think probably there are some innovations there that we have not tapped into, but I don't have specifics.
Great. In our final couple of minutes, maybe there's a quick answer to a question we received from Chuck. Do we have information about the degree to which private sector laboratories receive payments from digital channels? Anything about digital transfers to labs?
I'm assuming that means health labs, and again, we did not come across any data. Whenever we reached out to stakeholders in any of the 11 countries and said, are you familiar with any digital payments happening in the health sector? The universal answer was no, we're not seeing digital payments, but we didn't, survey labs, and there may very well be some examples there.
Can I add something to this just to give folks perspective? So in other parts of the world, what we are noticing is that there is a natural evolution of service provision in digital financial services based on market maturity. So a very early market, if you're seeing a transfer of funds from one person to the other, that is kind of your step one. When you see a market that's able to sustain an insurance product, that's actually a very developed market. So when we're looking at this region, it seems to me we're really at the very early stages. I think we should not expect to see advanced services at this time because the enabling environment, the policies, the private sector isn't quite ready for those services. So if we could begin, or as USAID colleagues, if we could begin to encourage those initial kind of small payments between individuals, perhaps even government to person payments that are going to happen anyway, those are like the initial kind of first grade foundational services that later on we can have international cross-border. Later on we will see payments that are more sophisticated, services that are more sophisticated. Even savings accounts can be sophisticated. Credit can be sophisticated, and so on and so forth. So I think all those things can come, but it's unlikely to come in a context where you don't have regulatory environment and the infrastructure to sustain it. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just mindful we're really out of time, so I want to just ask our 4 discussants who were terrific today, if you have a soundbite reflection that you would like to share in closing, I'll give you an opportunity to do that right now. Pam, we can start with you. Short.
My soundbite is that I hope that this engaged the audience and motivated them to read the report and to participate in a broader event come December.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Amani, your last words.
Yeah, my soundbite would be great job on this report. Be encouraged. This is the beginning, and it's a very normal, natural place to begin.
Thank you. Sarah?
Mine would be thank you, USAID, for your investing in this and for your energy, and again, making a plug for our December e-conference. Thanks.
Great. Last word to you, Amy.
Just giving thanks to you all for your participation, and also another plug for our e-conference that we'll be having, so look for more details soon. Thank you all very much.
Great. And I want to thank the Shops Plus and Apt Associates colleagues who helped put on this webinar and organize it. Jean Goodman, Maggie Stokes, David Thompson, Elizabeth Corley, and Marianne El-Khoury. Thanks to everybody for attending today. We appreciate you. Thanks and goodbye.
Maybe it's fine. Hello, I hear people. I hear.
Amy, okay, that's right, because you're on the cell phone. You can't go in the practice session.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. You need to unmute yourself, Pamela. And Amani need to unmute.
Yeah, everybody else.
I can hear you guys.
Okay. Yay!
Great. Yeah, we've been just debriefing a little bit, Amy.
Okay, good.
Wondering, what, any feedback that you have and just overall impression?
Oh, it was awesome. I think you guys were sharp as a tack. I mean, I think the presentation was really crisp. The intro was really cool, and it was a nice way to kind of spend a bit of introductory time. I had Carol pinging me as I expected, like at least one email saying, I can't get in and can you provide me links? And so that's why I was nervous, part of the reason at least. So she just, and she noted that she, saw that the 1:30 invitation for her, I think, to join the practice session. So, that part was confusing, but hopefully, the introduction went smooth regardless. I think the discussion was cool. I probably got a bit long-winded again because I was nervous, but I think everybody else did a great job in terms of just really pinpointing some things that are important, I think, for even our front office in terms of, the environment and the high-level policy and the enabling environment. So I think it was good, but I'd love to hear your inputs. I'd love to hear what y'all thought.
This is Marianne. Amy, I did not feel at all the nervousness, neither in the intro nor in the discussion questions. So maybe this is kind of your own feeling.
Oh, good.
Okay. You knew that you were on No, it didn't present that way at all. I thought
You
I
all
thought
were
everything
crushing
went
it.
very smoothly. Yeah, it's too bad that we couldn't get Carol. I believe there might have been a mix-up between the links that
Yeah.
she was supposed to attend as a panelist so that she can speak and be heard, as opposed
Yeah.
to an attendee.
Yeah.
I was going to say something. What was I going to say? Oh, just, I don't know if you guys were tracking, but we had 48 people in attendance,
Oh,
and
wow.
it stayed on until just 10 minutes before and before the end, and people started dropping, and at the very end we were down to maybe 32. So
Okay.
48 kept going until 10 minutes before the webinar closed. So I think that was very good attendance.
Great. That's great.
I just wanted to one of the things we were talking about, Amy, is how to give space for more questions.
Yeah.
And obviously shorter answers, but maybe, Gina, the way to go is either Sarah or I answer rather than both, right? So we'll kind of take turns so that again, and then you know, both Amani and Amy can answer if they both want to make contributions, but then we can fit in more questions, because I hear you, you know, the more we talk, the less the audience is got input.
Right.
Maybe also we just ask like that one question, you know, the what surprised you question, I think is fine. And then we can weave the PSE point into our comments. And I would say I would really prefer to hear from the digital finance DFS experts. I mean, I'm happy to answer the first question, but then can really ease off so the three of you can cover this particular technical area with your expertise.
Okay.
Amy, do you expect at tomorrow's session to have more questions from that intended audience? We only got 4 today, and I was expecting a lot more from today than tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, if we are light on questions, you can go ahead and speak. But I could tell
cool.
Gina, I could kind of, you know, let her know. I let her know earlier that, you know, at some point towards the end of the presentation, we had only gotten 1. So tomorrow, I'm not sure what your expectations are based on what you know from the audience submissions.
I don't know. I mean, we have the same number of people pretty much. We have 67 yeses and 38 maybes. And I think today we had 69 yeses and like 44 maybes. So I think we'll have the same amount of people. I think the missions, once they have a prompt question over with, do participate, you know. So I do think that they'll be keen to participate. So, and then if we need the other, you know, the other questions in our back pocket, we can do that. So maybe what we could do is do that first question and then refer to other people's questions and see if it gets some traction. And then if we finish up the audience questions, then we can go back to the planned questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so one planned question, open it up to our audience questions. Maybe limit the responses. So it sounds like, Amy, you'll sort of sit in the background unless you have a burning response. You can pipe up, but you'll kind of plan to not participate in some of the Q&A that's more technically oriented.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll participate in that first question just to participate. But I really want to hear. I feel like I think that people will appreciate the technical expertise that the other 3 have.
Yeah, great. And then the wrap up, is that any feedback on that? Just kind of people, we were a minute or 2 over time and rushing a bit, but just that final reflection. And that's, again, where then you, Amy, come in last to kind of bookend on it.
Yeah, I think
Any
for me,
suggestions or comments on what we might do differently with that?
I would start a minute before the end. I think you started right on 3 p.m.
Yeah.
Maybe
late.
start 1 minute earlier. I think the wrap up was great. It was short and sweet, and it really left the audience with a reminder of the e-conference later this year. So I would keep the same content, but start 1 minute earlier.
Okay. Yeah, and I think mission accomplished. I thought the speakers did a good job of, mentioning the December event. So Pam, you keep that up, but Amy, you set it up right in the beginning. So I think that was nicely done.
I think I just want to note that, I skipped over the points in terms of applying findings to your own initiatives and including country level digital strategies. But I think for the missions in particular, this will be worth noting. So I can more formally, with a little bit more time, kind of state those country level and country level planning points so that it's not missed. Because I think for our missions, it's good for them to know, like, okay, you have to have a digital strategy. Health is a great entry point in terms of figuring that out. So it'd be nice to emphasize with the missions, especially because now some of them have COVID-19 funding, and they're running up against, some digital opportunities and challenges.
Okay, so you'll weave that into your opening, sounds like?
I'll do it in the closing remarks.
In the closing, okay, got it.
Yeah.
A comment to David Stevens. Tomorrow we have also planned for a half-hour practice session. Since Amy is not able to connect to that, and I think we probably don't need a practice. I think we just want folks to log in to the non-practice session, get out of the private space just a few minutes before the event. Does that sound good to everybody?
That sounds good. I want to make sure I use the right link. And so I'm looking right now at the...
You want to look at the invitation that Maggie sent? It should be the same link as today, correct?
Yes.
The panelist
it's the
link,
same
right?
link as today.
Yes.
Okay, so use that panelist link.
Yes.
Okay.
David Thompson, it should be a different link because it's a different event.
What's that?
It's a different link.
It's a different link? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. No, sorry. Although, okay.
I'm confused. I thought Amy could not get in clicking on that link because that was a practice link for all of us.
No, so the way it works is that this is the same, so the panelist link is to the event, but then inside the event, you can create a private room called the practice session so that the attendees, as they come in, they're not listening to what you're saying.
Got it.
That private feature that Amy could not access, and we couldn't hear Amy and we couldn't hear you, Pam. So what So what Jean did is completely took us off of that private room. We're still are in the event, and attendees, as they come in, they could hear us. So that was the only difference.
Okay, and again, we'll be mindful of that and not be chatting about logistics while people are signing in.
Yes, and Maggie could keep track of the attendee list as they come in. And again, David Stevens, if you could just have us all join not in a private room. We'll just join the panelist link as usual.
All right, sounds good. And me and Jean should be on the call, but I'll let her know one of us will be there. All right.
Amy, I want to make sure that you have the correct link. And sorry, I misspoke. It is not the same link as today.
Okay.
It is in an invitation that Maggie sent. So you should see that link in tomorrow's calendar.
I'm opening up my calendar. It's not noting. Oh, yes, Maggie Stokes. Yep, I got it.
Okay, great.
Yep, thanks.
And Amani, that's the link for you too.
Right. I have something that, I'm still here. I see something here. It says panelist link, so I'm going to click on that.
That's the one.
Okay, very good. Colleagues, I need to jump off. I have another meeting now.
Yep. I think we all do. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Pam, are we all signing off? It wasn't.
I think so. I'm going to call you separately.
Okay, great.